Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good afternoon, friends. It's episode 666, and hopefully that means we're not jinxed, but I don't really believe in that, so I think we'll be okay. But we got an exciting episode for you today. I have an announcement to make about a title change for a co-host, and you're going to hear from that co-host today in a 10-minute discussion. So we'll start out with that, and then some YouTube updates and Instagram updates, and then we have the first of 6 debates. Now, I have to admit, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm calling them debates to generate a little bit of buzz. I'm not beyond a little bit of marketing sometimes. They're really an exchange of ideas. The first one today is pretty mellow. Chris Tier will be having a discussion with me. It's really a back and forth, and you're going to hear that. You're going to hear that. It's about class-based affirmative action, really. So you'll be hearing that conversation. But then we've got the next 2 weeks on Monday. Sorry, I keep saying 2 weeks. It's going to take me a long time, friends. I not for 9 years, I was in that mindset of Monday follows Monday, Thursday follows Thursday. So it's just going to take me a while. But for the next 2 episodes, so Monday, Thursday, Monday on our Audible podcast, we're going to have Carter up. And we're debating an article written by Brennan Barnard in Forbes magazine on maxing. You might want to read that August 1st edition. So that'll be up right away on Thursday. And then that conversation was complex. So it's really a part 1 and part 2. We went a while on that one. So you'll have Carter 2 weeks in a row. So those will be the 3 debates / back and forth / exchanges of ideas / expressions of various viewpoints. Call it what you want on our Audible podcast. And then on YouTube, I'm getting in the mix with Hillary, something to do with campus visits. Susan, that has to do more with the motivations and the mindset, the attitude, the heart of admission officers, balance between the admission side, the business side. You're just going to have to check it out. And then Carter and I, we have a really healthy exchange on YouTube on demonstrated interest. So those are all coming up. But on today's episode, like I said, you'll hear the introduction of someone with the title change, and you'll hear the first back and forth, with Chris Tier. And then we'll have the final part of the Bill Deresiewicz interview on Excellent Sheep. Now, don't turn off the just because you heard the Bill Deresiewicz interview already. You might have heard the Bill Deresiewicz interview over there on YouTube. This is the first time I've run content both on YouTube and over here, because I have a very important statement I'm going to make at the very end. So I'm not saying you have to listen to Bill Deresiewicz twice. I'm just saying if you've already heard that, skip it and don't miss the final message at the end. It's important. All right, friends, let's start with a quick announcement, and then let's get into our content for today. Counselor Connect is up, and Counselor Connect will be up on Sunday. So if you're hearing this on Monday, that's 6 days away. We're going to be talking about all things Common App. We'll be in our big group for a while, and then we'll break out into small groups with our discussion leaders. And there's also a very important announcement that's going to occur at Counselor Connect. So Sunday, 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific. Next week, you should have already received the notice if you're a member of Counselor Connect. Really important meeting, and really hope you'll be able to attend. All right, friends. Let me transition now to the next announcement. And once again, our listeners are the best. I knew when I jumped into this YouTube thing, I was just diving in the pool. I'm like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I'm sure the first videos are going to be completely unwatchable, but sometimes you just have to put yourself out there and learn. You guys have probably heard me say this, let your critics be your unpaid counselors. I'm like, we'll get enough feedback and eventually they'll get good. So we got some feedback. They're already a lot better. I mentioned it before. We had feedback on music. We could improve our music, up our game there. We had feedback on keeping the photos on the screen longer and not just putting them up and jumping around and making it too choppy. And we had feedback on not making the head of the co-host take up the whole entire screen. Well, this week we had some great feedback on Instagram. And the feedback was, I saw I'm a subscriber to Instagram, and one of the reels, I never said what it was, but one of the reels really caught my attention. I wanted to go to YouTube and watch the video, and I spent so much time and I couldn't find it. So I reached out to Sony to see if there's something we can do. And I have some good news for you. So I want to tell you exactly what Sony said. So Instagram doesn't actually allow clickable links in a Reels type caption or comments that takes viewers directly to YouTube. So first you're like, snap, that's what I wanted. However, Sony said we can add a clickable link to the video in our Instagram stories. And that's what she said she'll commit to moving forward. And visitors can easily access our YouTube channel through the clickable link in our Instagram bio as well. And then Sony says she's thinking of creating an additional reel this week that will quickly show our Instagram followers how to navigate to the YouTube channel using the link in our bio. So thank you so much, Sony, for doing that. So some creativity. Like she says, I think that quick training video will reinforce the connection between Instagram and YouTube channels. And once we're able to show everyone how to find the full videos, it'll be a lot more intuitive and it should be a lot better. If anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, either because it's your first podcast or maybe you're a sporadic listener, I'm going to have Nemanja play a message about 3 brand new services we rolled out on July 21st. Take a listen. Friends, we are in year 9 of our podcast, but July 21st, 2026 was the most important day of our podcast history. On July 21st, we launched a brand new YourCollegeBoundKid.com website. As soon as an episode goes live, you can now listen on YourCollegeBoundKid.com instantaneously. And as soon as a YouTube video goes live, it is up on the new website. The website is cleaner. Interviews and the spotlights and past episodes are so much easier to navigate. Special shout out to a brother-sister team, Mary LaChance in Connecticut and John Rooney in New York, who, by the way, are volunteering their services to help us make college knowledge available to all and being our webmasters. You have to check out the new YourCollegeBoundKid.com. The feedback so far on the new website has been off the charts. Effusive. Another thing happened on July 21st. We went from a Monday, Thursday, Audible podcast to a daily podcast. We now have YouTube videos that drop every Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. That is every day we don't have an Audible podcast. Most of these videos are between 10 to 20 minutes, but every 6 videos, a long-form video, a deep dive with a thought leader in admissions or higher ed. Our Your College Bound Kid podcast YouTube channel is more than just a place to learn. It's a community forum, and we can use that comment section on YouTube to interact with each other and strengthen our bonds in our community. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Stuck. You're killing me. I mean, I love the pod, but 7 days a week? Are you serious? Thanks to Sony Patel from Kansas City, every one of those 5 days we drop a new YouTube video, she will send out a video trailer on Instagram that will preview the YouTube video that went live earlier that day. So you can take 60 seconds to watch the Instagram video trailer, and then you can decide if the 10 to 20 minute YouTube video is worth your time. Now, if you're not signed up for our Instagram, it's just at YCBK Podcast. That's at YCBK Podcast. One more time, that's at YCBK Podcast. We are excited and we look forward to interacting with you, our listening family, in the comment section on YouTube. All right, friends, let's transition to a conversation with one of our co-hosts about a new role they will assume moving forward. Hi, Chris.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
Great. And I'm excited, friends. I have a big announcement, one I'm excited to make. You've probably heard me refer to Chris Tier as an interim podcast host, replacing almost like the substitute teacher while Julia Esquivel is on her sabbatical.
It's a good one.
It is a good one, right? Well, I'm here to say the interim has been removed. I'm very excited about it. And I just want to say a few reasons why I'm excited to add Chris into our co-host line of, I think, outstanding people. So there's multiple reasons. For one, you've heard me say this before. I always respect people that have been on both sides of the desk. I think it's a very interesting perspective you have on admissions. You've done counseling, you've done admissions. You don't have to have that to be a YCBK co-host, but I do think it's a really unique angle that it gives you. And then I also respect other experiences. So Chris just has a wide range of experiences, whether it's work overseas, whether it's being like in a head of school role. He was even a news anchor, or not, back 40 years ago,
Co-anchor.
Co-anchor.
USCW television news.
There you go. So like just that breadth of experience that he brings, I think is really rich. I've gotten to know him, and he's very service oriented. He's always trying to help. It must be something they teach you at Amherst over there, Chris, because Matt McGann, who, we had on 5 years ago and who's going to be coming back on, he's the same way. Like when I interviewed Matt afterward, he's like, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? He's always has that mindset. And I see that in you. You guys don't realize this, but a lot of times behind the scenes, Chris is always suggesting guests, and not only suggesting them, but introducing me to some people. He's got a very vast network, which I think is going to come in handy because part of our mission is making college knowledge available to all. He networks as well as anybody, in our co-host team, if not the best. And then there's something else which is really important, and that is, two other things are really important. When you have co-hosts, you have to have good chemistry. Like people can pick that up. A lot of times you'll notice I have Lisa and Linda on together because they really work well together and they have good chemistry, and people have picked that up. And, we have good chemistry. He's also someone, by the way, who's respected by the other co-hosts on our team. I've talked to multiple other co-hosts. Chris has a good reputation in the industry. He's built relationships with some of the others. That's important. And then the last thing I want to say is, we are still working at implementing some of the suggestions that you made, the 512 of you who completed our 2025 survey. We're still working through those. And one of the suggestions that came up was it'd be nice to have some people that would represent, if not a conservative perspective, a more of an independent perspective. Now, I don't know everybody's politics on the podcast. I don't talk to everybody about that all the time, but I know in general, I do think it's fair to say we do lean more on the progressive side, or at least center left. I don't know if I'd say staunch progressive, but at least center left. And I think it's fair. I've said before, I respect diversity of all types, including ideological diversity, perspective diversity. I think it's important to hear different perspectives. I think that's how you develop your critical thinking. And I think it's fair to say Chris represents a more of an independent view, sometimes maybe on some issues conservative. And even when he doesn't, he does a great job of really seeking to understand that perspective. So welcome aboard, Chris. We're happy to have you as a regular. And then I guess the last thing I'd say is, now that we're basically a daily podcast, counting YouTube in here, I don't want to burn out co-hosts like I've done in the past to Anika and Dave, because I can just go with this stuff. So I do need a deeper bench. I don't burn out my regulars. I'm kind of like the coach who's playing 6 players all the time, and the game's going into quadruple overtime, and people are like gasping, and so it helps in that regard.
That was poor Tom Thibodeau with my New York Knickerbockers. It got him to the finals playing 6 guys, and we had a new look this year, Mike Brown, and played a much deeper bench, and it worked out pretty well. So
I'd say very well. It was a nice championship run for the Knicks. So Chris, tell me what you want to say, and then why don't you share what you were talking to me about before we came on board about, seeking to understand perspectives, and what you did this week with Hillsdale.
Absolutely, Mark, and thank you very much. I'm honored to be put into the lineup somewhere. Off the bench, out of the dugout. We live in challenging times politically in this nation. And one of the things that I've always tried to do in my own education and in my working with other people's children as a teacher, as a coach, as a college counselor, as an administrator, is to continue to learn and continue to grow. I mean, one of the things about the liberal arts education that I received at Amherst and that I urge others to consider, if not embrace, is the idea of lifelong learning. And some of this on the political spectrum may be as simple as my father voted for Richard Nixon all 3 times he had a chance for president of the United States and watched Fox News till the day he died. And my mother now watches Fox, and my youngest brother would best be characterized as a libertarian. And I love them, and I don't always agree with them, but I need to understand them. And when it comes to my profession in college admissions, there has been a lot of criticism of the left-leaning tendencies of a a lot of colleges and universities, whether it's the student body or the faculty. And I'm always trying to understand, okay, that perspective with which I may agree more often than not, but there are other perspectives out there. And I need to do my job to understand other perspectives because I know what I think, but I need to know what other people think and why they think it. And I live part of the year in Florida, where there have been all kinds of things done with an intersection of politics and education. And I work with students in Texas, in Arizona, in California, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, where I live most of the year. So I need to understand the context of different states, different public college and university systems, as well as the private, or what I'm going to try to advocate for, the independent college and university sector. And to that end, I read and I reach out, and I emailed with a college admissions officer from Hillsdale College this week, and they're going to put me on their counselor fly-in list for next April. Hillsdale is regarded by a lot of people as the most conservative liberal arts college in the nation right now. And I went on their website and I watched a video, and I heard from the president. I heard from some professors and some students, and I received publications from them, about how to think about the American Revolution and the hard truth about the sanctuary movement. And that all came from signing up for what's coming out of Hillsdale. And it's just to understand a different perspective. And, there are other organizations that are looking at the landscape of higher education and asking a lot of questions about what's going on those campuses and what diversity of opinion does or may not at all exist. And so I'm trying to learn. And I'm not sure exactly how I got on the Cato Institute's mailing list, but I did. And interestingly, yesterday I received from them a copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, which Hillsdale had also sent me and gives to all its accepted students, which reminded me that when I was in journalism school at Columbia University some decades back, the late, great Fred Friendly, Edward R. Murrow's producer on the legendary broadcasts of the 1950s and 60s, like the one that helped bring Senator Joseph McCarthy down, Fred Friendly used to throw at us, because he was like that, copies of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States with the Bill of Rights. This is the copy that was given out at his memorial service in 1998 that I attended. And I would hardly have put him in the conservative realm in his own politics, as I would guess. But the commitment to the founding documents of the country, and then this whole question about the classic learning test, about a core curriculum, about the great books of Western civilization, for better or worse, you don't really understand the founding documents of our country if you don't understand some of that tradition that started with Plato and Aristotle and continued up through Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau, the kinds of thinkers that the founders were reading as they tried to figure out how to create what has endured now for more than 200 years as our republic. And there are blind spots. There are heinous things that have been done for indefensible reasons, but there is a Western intellectual tradition that has led to some of what does or has worked for our nation. And trying to understand that some people want to bring back more of that sounds, particularly to me, having earned a master's from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, in the Graduate Institute in Liberal Education, reading the great books of Western civilization, it sounds like a reasonable point of view. And so I want to learn more about where this conversation is happening, where it's not happening. And, it does have to do with, can we as a nation find common ground? Because if we continue to go in completely different directions, I'm not exactly sure what our common future looks like. So that's...
No, well said. Well said. And, one thing I do want to say is Chris is not MAGA. So if you're thinking Chris is going to be MAGA, far right MAGA, you're not going to get that. But I don't think that many people that are MAGA are probably listening to, the podcast. I've had a couple, And they're the ones that just absolutely lambasted me in emails and said I'm out, and then 1-starred us on the reviews. And so I think that I just want to make that clear. But he's an independent thinker. Another thing, he really is well read. So yeah, obviously he did that with the Great Books program. But I'm talking about currently, and I'd say this true for a lot of our co-hosts. They're reading all these articles, thinking about all the things. That's important because we need to stay abreast. So I'm just happy to say, welcome aboard, Chris. You're going to be a great addition. You passed the test. You got the interim label removed, and you'll be seeing Chris. You'll be seeing Chris over, here on the Audible podcast, and then, later today we're recording a bunch of YouTube videos. You'll see him over there as well. So welcome aboard.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, friends, let's transition to that debate I told you about. Chris and I discussing class-based affirmative action.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
With all of this use of AI, we just don't think we're getting student work in the writing anyway. We're either getting something a parent has looked at, or AI's looked at, or quite honestly, someone like you and I have given feedback on.
That's I heard that too, and I left that out. That's absolutely, I have heard that too. And I think of Christoph Gutentag, who was for years at Duke doing a fabulous job. I mean, they de-emphasized the writing in the application. I don't know when that was, a couple of years ago, because of the doubt about the authenticity of it. And that wasn't even particularly tied to AI, as I recall. It was just too many kids had too many people helping them too much. So.
And we had him on the podcast, and he explicitly said that on our podcast, if anyone wants to go back and listen to that interview. So that's not something in closed door conversations that he had. As far as the last reason we brought up, the retribution, the administration not interpreting the Supreme Court decision the way it was meant to be interpreted. Several things. One, Julie J. Park, great YouTube up with her 16-minute deep dive. She's one of the lead counsel's consultants to Harvard, University of Maryland, professor on the Students versus SFFA case. You can see compelling, cogent argument to making the case for affirmative action and going into a whole deep history of that case and the history of affirmative action, walking us through everything from Bakke, to the 2 Michigan cases, to the Fisher case. That's up on YouTube if you're interested in that. It's been bashed a lot, and I felt like it needed to have an adherent make the positive case for it. And Julie J. Park is great. So if that's of interest to you, I'd encourage you to check out that YouTube. The other thing I wanted to say is, and I'm sure this has been Chris's experience because it's mine, many schools have had conversations with me, people like Chris, our other co-hosts that are talking to schools all the time. And they have told us the fear of retribution and how it's impacted them. I'm thinking of a conversation I had with a private school, I'd say that's on the ascendancy right now, that said to me, we thought we'd be a little exempt from that because we're private and we're not public. Absolutely not. I'm thinking of another school that told me we'd love to do more diversity stuff, but we'd take a $12 million hit if they came after us, and we're just not in a place right now where we could afford that. So those just two of many examples. Like, I've had many a school tell me that we can't afford to be at war with this administration, with the Department of Justice and all the powers that they have if they set their sights on us. Christina Lopez, of course, one of our co-hosts, just left Barnard. She's talked about this right on the air. So I just think that has to, at some level, be a reason. I do think most of the time schools do what's in their own self-interest, not because they have a Fortune 500 mindset, but they are trying to just enhance their position in the marketplace or even survive. So I think probably the primary reason would not be that. It's hard to know. For different schools, it could be different ones, right? For some, it could be primarily the fear of AI. For another one, it could be this workload is overwhelming us. For others, it could be all our competitors are doing this, and we know that you get more apps if you make the process easier, right? And then we've got the diversity argument, and we've got the mental health. So it's hard to read. We can't read the hearts of anybody. Different schools can do things for different reasons. I think most likely it's a combination of these reasons. And then the other point that both you and Hillary brought out as well, which is depending on the school you're at, and I think you're much more likely to experience this at moderately selective schools than a place like Amherst, you just don't always feel like you're getting enough, like, is there enough value add in the additional time that our readers have to read, work that we're making our listeners go through to do something which might also lead to us getting less applications? Is there enough of a value add? And then when you
No,
look,
I think if we call it a standardized test, it's I think we've reached all the above.
Yes, there you go. Awesome. Great discussion, Chris. Appreciate it. And hopefully you guys enjoyed. We hadn't done hot topics in the news in a while. This one went a little long, but hopefully you enjoyed this. I know we haven't had a hot topics in the news in a while, but we haven't forgot about them. I'm trying to make our Audible podcast a little shorter, seeing as we're now giving you 5 days a week of YouTube content. So you might have noticed most of these Audible podcasts have gone from 90 minutes down to an hour tops, but we still haven't forgot about our college spotlights, our hot topics in the news. And it's been a while since we've done one of these, and I thought this article warranted it. And I thought that looping in the writing piece actually made sense too, because most of where I took the conversation on the fraud squad argument was in the direction of extracurricular validation. But we know some of it is also writing collaboration. And in fact, you mentioned that right away in your lead. You led more with AI impacting writing, and I talked more about the extracurriculars when we know it's really both hand that Caltech's looking at.
Yeah.
Anything else, or you want to put a bow on this one? You think we wrapped it up?
On this particular topic, and we can certainly put a bow on it. I do have questions for you. I'm very interested about the use of class-based affirmative action and the whole initiative there, Richard Collenberg's work, and the decades that have gone into, okay, SCOTUS has done what it's done. Well, what's the argument that has been made and is being implemented by the places with the resources to think about affirmative action in a different way than race?
Yeah, so I get into that with Julie J. Park, and the second I did 2 interviews with her, I think it's race and class. It's not race or class, it's race. I basically agree with what Julie says. It's not either or. I think Collenberg was exploited. I mean, SFFA called on him to testify on their behalf. And a case example that I brought up, and I brought this up in my interview with Julie J., and I think anybody who's Black or brown would know this, but have Black or brown people storm the Capitol like happened in January and see if they get treated the way the cops treated those folks. So it's race and class. It's not race or class. Class-based has been ignored for a long time. I agree with that. Just like rural's been ignored for a long time. And so an accentuation on rural and class, I think, is warranted. But I disagree. And, pretty much Julie spoke for me verbatim, to be honest. The place where I disagree with the Collenbergs, who make it look like race is invalid metric, and we can just use class as a substitute for race, and we can get diversity that way. There's a lot of overlap, but they're also very different. And so both are important. And so I don't come down on the race. Class is just a proxy for race. So now ignore race and go with class. I think both class and race are both important. And they're also, while there's a lot of overlap, they're both very unique. And both of them deserve to be extolled and identified for the unique perspective that they both bring. So, and I think it's unfortunate because I don't know Collenberg's heart. Seems like a good guy from what I know, but boy, I feel he got exploited because SFFA used him. Yeah, there's the book. I feel like he really got exploited. Ed Bloom used him as the poster child to make the case for them. Here's a guy talking about class, not race. So I don't agree with him overall. I agree that class has been ignored and it's important and it should be recognized for what it is apart from race. But to conflate the two and the way he does and to say, oh, you don't have to do anything with race because you can just use class to get race, couldn't disagree more. And the proof that I use for that is January 6th. So
yeah, I respect very much your point of view on it. The thing I found quite compelling about Collenberg's book, Class Matters, was the origin of his interest, as he describes it, in the thinking of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy toward the ends of their lives, when they came together on issues not only of civil rights, but the poor people's movement
and all of those things.
And Bobby Kennedy trying to put together a coalition that, was inner city, was farm workers, and was whites in Appalachia. And, I think there is a connection here that the current administration would not want to hear intersectionality used again. But there is a crossover here, and at a certain point, it's an argument that I think has merit in terms of how do you provide opportunity to people whose families have never had that opportunity for whatever reason. And, I had a sense that, President Obama at one point observed that Sasha and Malia really didn't need a break in college process just because of their heritage. And there is that. How can you capture the truly talented, high potential young people who are coming out of backgrounds where if you give them the opportunity, they will do something that nobody from their family, maybe nobody from their community has ever been able to achieve before. And, there is a bit of Dr. King in, content of your character, being the really essential thing. But it's I admire your conviction on the point.
Yeah, there are a lot of us, I would say, that look like me that Kallenberg infuriates, to be totally honest. Like, he'll use things like Dr. King said, it's not, it's the content of your character, not the color of your skin, to make it sound like Dr. King would be against any race-based initiatives. And it's the same thing David Dukes and others have done. I'm not putting him in that category because he clearly doesn't self-describe himself as a right-wing extremist. He clearly does not describe himself that way. But nobody in the civil rights movement, NAACP, Dr. King would agree with sort of his race doesn't matter. You can just use class as a proxy for race argument. The point that I think there's some wisdom to is you have to kind of work in the context that you're in right now. And we're in such an anti-DEI environment that it might be strategic to do more things along the lines of class to get some things done, just because the political will is just not there to take a look at race and factor it in right now into things. So there might be some sort of practical vitality to using the approach he advocates for. I just wish he wouldn't make it sound like, we got it all wrong before with having some race-based initiatives. We should have been using class all over. Like even his book Class Matters, a little bit of a victory lap he takes, because you remember he had a book, The Remedy, almost 30 years ago. And that he's been saying...
I don't know the earlier book. The other thing about Class Matters that struck me was that it was Tony Marks, president of Amherst at the time, Larry Summers, president of Harvard at the time, Shirley Tillman, president of Princeton at the time, who were right there in the beginning of the book in the conversation. And I have seen as an Amherst alum, the emphasis shift there greatly toward first-gen, Pell eligible, and now being members of the Stars College Network, looking for students from profoundly different backgrounds. And they do have a prompt that does seek rather explicitly or offer rather explicitly the opportunity for applicants to write about diversity and about their life experience and address exactly what Chief Justice Roberts, following Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, allowed could happen. So there is a both and here that...
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap. There's definitely a lot of overlap, and both, in my opinion, have gone ignored for the vital role they've played. But I also think it's important to point out how they're different, and each and of themselves. It's just sort of like saying, let's say you were looking to have diverse perspectives in your student body. And so you, even through a prism of race and ethnicity, and so you wanted to have more Black, Brown, Latino, Asian underrepresented demographics, Native American, Indigenous. Let's say you wanted to have all that as part of different voices at the table. That does not preclude your need to do international recruitment, which still brings in a different voice and a different type of perspective diversity. So that's kind of how I see them, right? Like race and class have a lot of overlap, but they're different, and in and of themselves, they have value from a standpoint of, if you're looking at assembling a class of people to help you have your own critical thinking challenged and to expose you to the different people you'll meet in the real world, then both class and race have vitality. But you know what? We've hijacked this and gone all in a different direction. Hopefully our listeners enjoyed us getting into the weeds. And I know you've been a big fan of some of Kallenberg's work, and I actually kind of like that because I want our listeners not just to be exposed to everybody with the same perspective. Like, I think that's important, and it's something I like to do more of on this podcast as we as we move forward. One of the things I'm thinking about doing, Chris, on YouTube is having some debates from a couple of different people of different perspectives. Tell you the truth, I'd love to have a debate between Kallenberg and Julie J. Park. She's been a big critic of him for 20 years. And so I think they'd maybe both be up for it. Maybe we can have some debates and record them. I think our listeners might like that.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating stuff. I think when you were describing all the different types of diversity, when you're trying to bring conversation to as many different perspectives as possible, the one that too many of the most selected schools simply do not have represented is the conservative voice. And
that's true.
The effort I was interviewed for a piece, I think, in Inside Higher Ed, where a survey found that students would be willing to spend $2,000 more of their parents' money to be at places with like-minded peers. And I said, wait. That's exactly backwards. You want to be at a place with peers of different points of view to hear them, to test your thinking. Maybe it'll sharpen your thinking. Maybe it'll reaffirm your beliefs, but you will at least have been exposed to another point of view. And, I've even talked with people at, a great place like Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas.
We both love that school, both of us.
Right. As they move to a national liberal arts college and a reclassification, Carnegie classifications, I spoke with them about, the idea of study the liberal arts where not everyone is liberal, right? Same would go, for Rollins College in Florida. Can you be in a larger setting where, let's understand that the liberal arts actually have nothing to do with politics if you understand them correctly. They have to do with the arts of freedom. They have to do with habits of mind that are flexible and forward-looking and enable you to take on any challenge before you.
So you should know, Chris, I agree with that, right? Because if I'm going to be consistent, well, what's the antecedent of that? I agree that colleges, more liberal schools could use more conservative voices, more very conservative schools could use more liberal, but ideological diversity is important. And otherwise you get groupthink, you're not have your most, deeply held beliefs challenged. Doesn't develop the best critical thinking skills. One thing that I would maybe say a little different, and you might agree with this as well, going to the Inside Higher Ed article, I would say it's important to have kids that think like you and think different. Because if you don't have people that think like you, then, because you might not you want to find your people and having a shared group of values about things that you're important is important about the place feeling like home. So I would say both and is true, and I'm sure you agree with that as well.
Totally. My only concern these days is that there are some places that are just echo chambers, and
true.
You already believe it, and then it's reinforced. And so what did you actually learn? And
it's up to us in our counseling when we're working with families, and I know we both do this, to say that to a family. Like, this is something that I have said before to both sides of the political spectrum. I've had very liberal families who I think want to hear disparate voices, and I've had to say to them, you're going to have a hard time finding a conservative on that campus that's going to feel comfortable speaking out. Same for Christian students. Like I've had to say to students, I don't know if you're going to find your Christian supportive community there, because I don't know if it's there. And based on students I've had that have gone there, they haven't found it. And then likewise, I also, and you do the same thing, right? Say, that place might be too conservative to you. I just had to say that to a family from Maryland this week. They were expressing interest in a school where I've had students transfer from because it's been too conservative for what they were looking for. And I just I want them to know, based on what you're telling me is important to you, I don't know if that's the environment you're going to find. And so we do that on both sides because we're just trying to get the right fit for our families. Doesn't really matter what their politics are, but we've both worked with kids that have transferred because it's too liberal, it's too conservative, and it's just, I'm not finding my people. And so that's part of it's our job as, practitioners to figure out what's important to our families and listen to the best of our ability, ask the right questions to the best of our ability, and then use a filter of our experience to let them know this may or may not be a good fit, while at the same time respecting their ability to make their own judgment when they visit or they interact. And so that's kind of our job. So we're on the same page on that. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that some places are, like, particularly on the liberal side, there's conservative schools too, but there are more places that are homogenous, with not a lot of thought diversity on the liberal progressive side. There are more of them, especially amongst elite schools.
Well, that's the most selective schools tend in that direction.
Yes.
As far as I can tell.
Yeah. And, I have some thoughts on that, but it might introduce, I'll get the hate mail if I say them. I think that when you study history, you're going to become a lot more aware of certain types of inequities and things like that tend to make you have certain views than when you don't study history. But so I think there's reasons for that. But having said that, I still think it's important that you have different voices because they can challenge your thinking and sharpen your thinking. And when you don't have different voices, you really, you just kind of get a caricature of the other side. You don't get the best arguments of the other side. I know for me personally, and I lean progressive, but it was very important to me for my daughter's schools that I thought they'd hear both voices.
Absolutely.
And I felt, this, my kids went to Davidson and UGA, and I think you'd probably know because you know these schools. Those are places, students lean more progressive this generation, but there's enough conservative voices at those schools that they're not just like, homogeneous, generic enclaves of liberal thought.
No, amen. Davidson, I worked very hard to get one of my students from Florida who refused to look at any place in the South to go look at Davidson because I thought it would be a great place for her to consider. And she did, family did, they loved it. Now, she went to Williams College, but she gave Davidson a look. And talking with Chris Gruber through the years, I just think Davidson is as good as it gets. I think it's superb. And I have members of my extended family who've gone to the University of Georgia, multi-generational. I've been on that campus at least a couple of times, and there's a lot more going on there than just go Dogs.
Yeah.
The Georgia Bulldogs. There's a lot. And you walk on that campus and you see the plaque for Charlene Hunter Ball and the other student who integrated that place. And, you realize that it's during your lifetime and you see the distance that, the Southern universities have come.
Well, it's also fascinating. And you see the schools change over time. UGA is a completely different school than it was pre-Hope Scholarship, pre-1994.
Right.
And now with the Hope Scholarships, which students in Georgia, by the way, don't have to pay tuition if they have a 3.0. Now, you're not getting in there with a 3.0, but if you get in there, you're not paying tuition. So I can't tell you how many students I've taken through the process and they get in very, very selective northern schools. And then they're like, we could pay $90,000 or we could pay about $18,000 for meals, housing. We have pretty much no transportation, books. 90 versus 18. We're going to go for the 18. So that's been revolutionary at transforming the school, coupled with the growth of the state as people move more down here. Yeah. Somewhat mirrors Florida that way, right? You've got Florida, bright futures, Florida prepay, low tuition, growing state. UF, crazy harder to get into now than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Florida State, same thing.
Yeah. As long as the kids don't say that the tuition is free, because the tuition is prepaid by the taxpayers of the state. It ain't free, kids.
Yes.
It ain't
no free lunch.
Go to class.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you letting me bounce off topic series that we did for our listeners. I think I know our listeners enough to know they kind of like this sometimes when we just ad lib and just talk about these things and don't always stick to the script. So this has been fun and look forward to having you back for more discussions.
Thank you, Mark. Look forward to it myself.
Friends, hopefully you enjoyed that back and forth. One thing I realized, I actually did not tell you the videos that were going up on Thursday on YouTube. That's something that I try to remember to do, but this is new to me. So what went up on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? Well, there is a video on Should You Trust College Scattergrams that you can check out. There's another video called College Overseas. Should you apply? 6 things to know. That's with Kevin Newton. And then what just went up Sunday today, the model minority myth. Why Asian Americans reject the model minority. And that's with Julie J. Park. And I'm sharing that with you because you'll notice in the conversation with Chris, I refer to the conversation with Julie J. Park. So we talk about Class Matters and we talk about the book. If you're curious about that, you want more information on this topic, then go over and check out the deep dive with Julie J. Park. Yeah, it's mostly about the model minority myth and why Asians reject it. But we have a really good back and forth because we jump into some other topics as well. So you can check that out. All right. Now, this week, I'd like to tell you what's going to appear between now and on next Thursday. So Christina, Susan, and I did a video on something coaches do that absolutely grinds our gears. You'll be hearing that between this week and next week's episode. And then Hillary and I did another grinding our gears. And this grinding our gears is something parents do. So you're going to want to listen so you can avoid this. So that's up on YouTube this week, all before Thursday. All right, friends, let's transition to the final part of the Bill Deresiewicz interview on Excellent Sheep. And remember, if you've already heard this on YouTube, you can listen again or you can fast forward to the end because I have a very important announcement at the end.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
All right, friends, we've reached the final part of my interview with Bill Deresiewicz, New York Times bestselling author of the book Excellent Sheep and many other books as well. In part 2, Bill talks about the balance, and he talks about when students are pursuing professions. When is it okay? When is it actually advisable? When is it actually commendable? Versus when he's critical. He makes a very important distinction. Bill talks about whether he has challenged Yale with his conclusions and whether they've listened to him. Bill gives his advice to parents on how they can navigate their kids through this process. Bill drops a bombshell when he challenges parents to think about the schools and the neighborhoods that you are in, that you're sending your kids to, if you don't want them to end up as sheep. Bill gives advice for what a college student can do to resist peer pressure. Bill tells us what students' superpower is and how they can use their superpower. I share some ideas that I found to be effective. Bill talks about what happens if you play the status game. Bill talks about how he found his own personal fulfillment. And finally, Bill talks about the danger of making your kid feel like they need to know what they're going to do with their life when they're not even 20 years old yet. Listen and enjoy. Certainly, I'd say I have a sizable number of attorneys that are not happy, but I also have a sizable number that are very, very happy and love what they do. So, it's tricky sort of communicating to strike that balance between we're not saying that these professions are bad. There's also another person that says, it's because I make what I make that I'm able to support the philanthropic causes that I support, and I get great joy out of supporting the philanthropic causes that I support. And so I just want to make sure that we're talking about all angles of this thing.
Sure. Look, it's absolutely fair. I would say that medicine is a little different than the other 4 things because it has clear social benefit. I think some aspects of being a lawyer, some roles in the legal profession have clear social benefit that I think, and I'm not saying it in a moral sense, I think it can contribute to job satisfaction. I think if it's about making money so that I can do something with my money that gives me a lot of satisfaction, that's also completely legitimate. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to ask. And this is what I say to students, high school students, college students who are jumping through these hoops. First of all, is this working for you? How do you feel about the life that you're leading? Like maybe you do have a really clear goal. You're studying engineering because you love engineering or you want to do, I don't know, so environmental engineering. And so you just have to get through these really hard courses. And and therefore you don't find yourself being miserable. You don't find that this is pointless and aimless. Great. Don't listen to me. Don't trust me. Don't believe me. Consult your own feelings, your own experience. Is this kind of life working for you? And then in terms of career choice, medicine, law, whatever, I would say again, why are you choosing to go into these fields? If you're doing it because you can see some fulfillment that you're going to get out of it, whatever that might mean, I'm interested in the work. I feel like it's going to be of benefit to others. I feel like the money I'm going to make is going to help me support a family, support my parents, whatever. Again, good. But are you doing it, as I almost went to law school, because you can't think of anything else to do?
Bill, to what extent have you been able to talk to the powers that be at places like Yale or administrations and challenge them? Like, what are we doing to produce such, sort of homogenous thinking, monolithic behavior, like groupthink? Like, what are we doing? We pride ourselves on saying we believe in duality and we believe in this interdisciplinary education and the whole liberal arts vision of thinking critically and being exposed to all kinds of different people. Like, if you think of what you're describing about Yale, it's actually the opposite of the way what Yale sort of says it's all about and what it claims to be and how it recruits students. Have you had any conversations with them? Like, what is our role and what can we do to counteract this? And if so, what have you heard?
I have had no conversations with the powers that be. Insofar as they know of my existence at all, they don't want to hear about this. I have gotten some pretty angry, dismissive, uncomfortable feedback. But I have spoken at many, many schools, including all of the Ivy League schools and many elite liberal arts colleges and other elite universities. The people who invite me are not the president of the university. They are faculty, maybe the rare faculty that's really committed to undergraduate teaching, who wants this message to be delivered to their students. I have interacted with a lot of liberal arts college presidents who've invited me to their campus because those institutions tend to be more oriented towards teaching and towards sort of thinking about like what you want to do with your life. And I've spoken at least 20 elite private high schools, let's say, because those institutions, generally at the invitation of the head of school, because those institutions want their students to hear this message because they see their students suffering through this system and falling prey to these false choices. And they want someone to deliver a message that enables students to think differently about their education and also maybe reassure students that they're not going to end up, sleeping under a bridge if, God forbid, they don't go to Harvard. How much that affects, that really changes the picture? I can't say. My goal is to try to help individual students and individual parents open up, sort of take a breath and kind of open up their sense of possibility.
Well, let's go there. So you're speaking to mostly parents of high school students, although our survey shows 31% of our parents also have a kid in college. Maybe the oldest is in college and then the second or third kid is in high school. You're speaking to a lot of college counselors as well. And knowing our listeners, there are a lot of them who would be thinking, I don't want my kid in an unfulfilling job. They want them to be comfortable. They don't want them in an unfulfilling job or profession or livelihood. Who wants that 10, 12 hours a day for 35, 40 years? Nobody wants that. So I could see a lot of them thinking, how can I avoid my kid falling into this trap? What would be, Bill, what's your advice for me? What would you say to them?
Right. First of all, I think that reducing the level of anxiety is always a good thing. One of the big features of the lives of these students is this tremendous sense of anxiety, this amounting often to panic. If I don't get straight A's, if I don't get into Harvard or Stanford, my life is going to be over. What's going to become of me? And a lot of that can come from parents because parents are understandably worried, but maybe more worried than they need to be about what's going to happen to their kids. This can also be a matter of what school your kid is in. I had a student who said, she told me that her parents weren't crazy. Her parents were, much calmer about all this stuff. But as she put it doesn't matter if your parents aren't crazy because all the other parents are crazy. So the community that you live in and the school that you send your kids to can affect them in really profound ways. And it may even be worth thinking about where you're sending them and even therefore where you're living. I know that's kind of a tall order, but I'm trying to speak honestly. I always tell parents, like, I know that your job is really hard and I'm not trying to make it sound like it's easy. And I know that you have a lot of concerns about your kids that are legitimate, especially in a society that's increasingly one of winners and losers. But I also say, think back to when you were 14 and 16 and 18 and the fears that your parents had for you and their sense that like, how is this kid ever going to make their way in the world? And like, they're 14 and they don't know, but somehow you managed to get to the point that you're at, parents, where you are accomplished professionals, you're doctors or lawyers or dentists or whatever. And you did it because you grew up and because you discovered fortitudes and capacities within yourself that you didn't suspect and your parents certainly didn't suspect. And you know what? Your kids who, just yesterday you had to wipe their nose, but guess what? Tomorrow they're going to be that too. Trust your kids. Trust what's inside your kids already.
Let's talk about the kid in college. Any tips for the kid in college to not get sucked into the tsunami of thinking, if I don't do, management consulting, finance, Wall Street, corporate law, I'm not successful?
Yeah. I think it's hard to be a kid in one of these colleges. in one of these selective colleges where everyone is heading in one of 3 or 4 or 5 directions. And I think that it can be lonely to be sitting there and in the privacy of your own mind, feeling dissatisfied with all of this, feeling like, why am I here? What am I supposed to do? I would say, and I know this is easier said than done. I would say, do what you can to resist the pressures that are coming at you from your peers. You don't have to do what people tell you you're supposed to do. You are allowed to take courses just because you're interested in them. You're allowed to major in things that are not supposedly the things that are going to bring you this life of status and wealth, but that you are drawn to. College is a wonderful opportunity. I know you've heard that a million times, but you have to take control of it, right? This is the thing. Like, I'm not really critical of these schools necessarily as educational institutions. They all offer, tremendous, like great teachers and great courses and all kinds of resources. The problem is that this mentality that we've been talking about so often prevents students from taking advantage of all of that stuff. And here you are, and I don't want to increase people's anxiety, but here you are, and this is like your shot. Like, you're not going to be in college again. And it's so often the case that when people are 30 or 40 or 50, they say, oh, I wish I could have studied this. I wish I had done college differently when I had the chance. Like, you have the chance now. And you shouldn't let these anxieties that I think are ultimately false deprive you of that. I mean, another thing I say to kids at selective schools is like, the world isn't fair, but you are actually on the good side of the world's unfairness. Like, you're going to come out of this selective school with all kinds of possibilities for your life that other kids aren't going to have. Like, just graduating from the school that you're in is going to give you all kinds of advantages. And that's not really fair, but it is reality. So you don't need to worry so much. Am I majoring in this? Am I majoring in that? Like, you're probably going to be fine because you're going to the school. So take advantage of it. Not taking advantage of it isn't going to mean that you don't have these privileges. You're going to have them anyway.
Friends, hopefully you're enjoying our new YouTube channel. If you're finding this interview interesting and helpful, share it with somebody else. Click the bell notification. You'll get notified when we have new videos that drop. And comment below in the comment section and subscribe, because we're going to have a series of a number of thought leaders of the world of education, and Bill Deresiewicz, which is just the first one on our new YouTube channel. Bill, is there anything else kind of on the topic of excellent sheep that we haven't said that you want to address?
Yeah, let me just say one more thing that I like to say to students. You are not responsible to other people for your choices in life. Not caring what other people think about your choices is a superpower. You don't have to answer to other people. You don't have to make other people happy. So don't worry about the judgments of your peers, the people around you, what you think your friends' parents are going to say when they see you back at home and they're wondering what happened to you. Like, this is your life to live. Care less about what other people think.
I think that's important. And I think it's important that we give people permission to do that. I feel like I've been doing that for 26 years, but I also have come to realize how hard that is, because for years in my mind, it was just stop the groupthink. The world actually doesn't work the way you think it does. So if you can emancipate yourself from that kind of thinking, you'll find out, I'm a big believer that most individuals themselves control their destiny by doing things like being hard workers and being resilient and having grit and having good communication skills and having integrity and networking and doing something you love and something you're good at, but I've come to realize how hard that message is, because the way it feels to a teen and even a parent, quite honestly, is it feels like lack of respect. And as human beings, we clamor and crave respect. So it feels like if I take this path, I don't get respect. And if I take this path, I get respect. So what I find is helpful is to sort of get out of the echo chamber. Like in a college kid, I'd say, go study abroad. Maybe you'll meet new people. Join a club and have a peer group that's completely different than what you ever thought you would. Parents, have that person who took the non-traditional background, Uncle Bob or someone at work, have them over for dinner, go to a restaurant with them and expose your kid to someone who took a non-traditional path, is doing something different. You're probably familiar with Frank Bruni's book, Where You'll Go Is Not Who You'll Be. Oftentimes I'll have my kids read that because they need to get emancipated from that thinking, because often I find that the angst from parents and peers is over the idea of, if I don't do this path, I sort of go along a B trajectory for a career, not an A trajectory.
Yeah.
The way I experience it the most is I need to go to a T20 school. If I don't go to a T20 school, then maybe I'll have a good life, but I'm probably limited to the B level of success. I'll never reach A level success. That's how I experience it the most. And getting out of that groupthink when for kids it feels like respect or not respect, that's hard, right? Because it's the same reason why people don't go back to the 20th reunion, because they don't feel like explaining how they put 100 pounds and they're on their third marriage or they're unemployed. And why do I want to go into that level of emotional pain? I'll just not go. So that's if a 42-year-old feels that way, who's had more opportunity, more life experience, how's a 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old think? Right. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I lived some of this. I mean, when I talked about like going home, it was actually like for my big brother's wedding. And like, I was like 10 years out of high school and I was just starting graduate school practically. And my friends' parents, my childhood friends' parents were like, what happened? Like, what happened to this guy? He was supposedly so smart. And, that really, it really is painful. And you really feel judged. And my parents also like, what's going to become of this kid? And there were long stretches of time in my 20s when they were very disappointed with me. And that's all really hard to deal with. I don't want to pretend that it isn't hard to deal with. But what I've learned and what I've seen with other people is that if you play the status game, first of all, you can never win because there's always somebody above you and there's always somebody looking down on you, or you think they're looking down on you, and there's always somewhere higher that you can go, and you can never get out of it, right? There's no it never stops until you decide, and you can't just decide once. Like it's a repeated series of decisions not to care about this, not to let this kind of judgment or imagined judgment get to you. Only that makes it stop. And then you find out that it's not this sort of linear, vertical scale, like a B level life, an A level life, a C level life. That's not really what the world is, or it isn't what it has to be. It's this tremendous horizontal variety of possible paths. So what I'm getting to is like, the thing that happens when you step outside of that logic is you discover your life isn't A or B or C. Your life is like, especially like in your 20s and early 30s, can be this wonderful series of surprises. Like I can do this. I have this ability that I didn't realize I have. I can literally go to this place or be with these people that nothing in my background has ever prepared me to believe that I could do. And I don't know anything about, but it's this amazing experience and it's sending me in a completely new direction. Right? This is what happened to me. I suddenly discovered that like I can study English Lit. I'm going to study English Lit. And then even later, even in my 40s, I was like, well, academia isn't really working for me. Maybe I can go and become a writer. And that's what I did. And it's pretty cool. I mean, it's not cool to be a writer. It's cool that I'm like doing something that I find really fulfilling, that nobody ever told me I could be. That's such a greater reward. That's such a greater reward than any level of status you could ever get.
And you probably had no idea you'd be doing that, not only in your teens, not in your 20s, but maybe not even in your 30s or early 30s.
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
Like there is another type of pressure out here that you need to know what you're going to do with your life by the time sometimes I will have a parent of a client and the kid is 15 or 16, and the parent is very concerned that the kid doesn't know what they want to do with their life. Speak to that.
This is terrible. And I think that colleges are partly responsible for this because they expect you to sort of be a much more highly shaped person or present as one on your college application than it's reasonable to expect any high school student to be. I mean, how could you possibly know what you want to be when you're 15? You don't know anything about the world. You don't know anything about yourself. You don't even know. I mean, there are many of the things that you can study in college that you can major in, you can't be exposed to even in high school, right? So how would you even know that that's possible? I think it's terribly, terribly detrimental. And I think that I suspect that parents do this again because they're worried about their kids. They want it's the reason I decided the week I got to college what I was going to study, because the uncertainty was frightening to me. The uncertainty that your kid doesn't know what they want and they're going to wander and they're going to be one of these kids because you're afraid for them. But I think you really need to, again, I'm sympathetic with parents, but I think they need to let go of this need It's really a desire for control, right? It's a desire for control over the future. You know how things are going to go. Your kid has decided, and it's steps A, B, C, all the way through Z. That's going to get them there. That's the logic of this whole thing. Life is going to be made predictable. Success is going to be made predictable. It's these 26,000 steps that take forever, but at least they'll get you, It doesn't work like that. And for the most part, it doesn't work like that. Even successful professionals usually don't have careers like that. But it certainly doesn't work to impose that on your kid. This is how they end up miserable.
No, I get it. I also get the reality of the anxiety of my brother, Uncle Bob. He went off to college and he's paid a lot of money, and his daughter, Jessica's living at home in the basement and she's working at Starbucks right now. And I don't want that to happen to you. So I get that reality of that fear. It's a big expense to invest in something if it looks like you're not going to be self-independent and self-sufficient. And I'm sympathetic to that anxiety.
But what leads to the kid in the basement? Is it because they majored in English? Or is it because maybe they majored in economics and instead of continuing down the path to the, they sort of crashed, right? Because they said to themselves, I actually don't want to do this. I don't want to keep doing this. But they hadn't spent their time in college figuring out what they do want to do. I think that happens a lot.
No, there's no doubt about it. And there's also no doubt about the fact that if someone can just pursue what they love and pursue what they're good at, most of the time that can be turned into a livelihood. A really good book came out years ago, it's over 20 years ago now, called Childhood Roots of Adult Happiness by former Harvard professor, chair of psychiatry. And he said, when you just look at how kids play at a young age, they're almost telegraphing for you, what is it they love? And if you'll just support that. But there are too many parents, in my opinion, and I know you share this, that really will not even allow their kid to major in certain majors because they're like, that's a dead end major.
That's right. I love that thing about the childhood play because I realize that about myself in retrospect. I sort of see things that telegraph my future as a writer. I would say, look, people might dispute what you just said in general about kids, but if your kid is the kind of kid who has a legitimate chance at going to a selective school, highly selective school, that means your kid is smart, your kid works hard, your kid is disciplined, your kid is capable of delaying gratification, which means you put all that in service of that passion that they have, that innate talent that they have. Then I think your argument becomes much stronger because those are the things that conduce to success. It's just when they are directed towards a goal that is the child's own goal, that is internally driven, not externally imposed, right? They call it, right, intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic motivation.
Bill, that's a drop the mic moment. Let's leave it there. Thank you very much. Excited to delve into your next book, The End of Solitude, but this has been fantastic. Friends, you may be wondering, why didn't you put Bill on the hot seat? I thought every first-time guest goes on the hot seat. The reason why is because I interviewed Bill right after this on his most recent book entitled The End of Solitude, and the hot seat's at the end of that interview. Now, this interview you heard was interesting. In my opinion, very interesting, but you can be the judge. But it did mostly apply to students at certain schools who feel a certain type of pressure. But Bill's book and our interview, The End of Solitude, applies to every single parent who's listening to this and every single student. So, friends, hopefully what you saw in this interview is that you can watch our content on YouTube, but you can also listen to it if you're unable to watch because you don't have time. You can listen to it audibly and get most of the same learning experience. Now, I just realized something. There are commercials on YouTube. So I guess it's a little different. And why did you say I just realized that? Because I have YouTube Premium and there's no commercials. And once you get YouTube Premium, there's kind of no going back. But that's just my opinion. So you can get YouTube without commercials, but you do have to have YouTube Premium. Now, I'm still trying to determine how much of the content that I'm going to play both over here on the Audible podcast and on YouTube. There's some overlap in the audience, but not as much as I thought there was going to be, at least so far. If I had to guess right now, I'd say about 1/7 of the content will air on both YouTube and here. Sometimes it goes first on YouTube and then here, like this one did, this Bill Deresiewicz interview. The next interview up is with Clemson's director of undergraduate admissions, Rick Barth. And that one will go first on here. You'll hear that next week. And then that's not going on YouTube until the end of September. But I'm still learning about what percentage of YouTube viewers are also podcast listeners. So I could tweak that. But if I'd had to guess right now where I'm thinking my thoughts, I'd say about 1/7 of the YouTube content will also be here. But 6 months, I probably have a better perspective on that. Hopefully you enjoyed this interview. All right, friends, on Thursday's episode, as promised, we have the start of the debate with Carter on an article Brennan Barnard wrote in Forbes. It's about students maxing, and you just have to check it out. I'm actually going to read the article so you can know what I'm talking about, and then you'll hear you'll hear Carter and I discuss it. And then we have a brand new interview, and I've sussed this out before. I'm very excited about it. It's a 5-parter. Yeah, I went an hour and 40 minutes, chunking out into 20 minutes with Rick Barth, Director of Admissions at Clemson. Deep dive on Clemson. It's about an hour and 5 minutes just on how Clemson makes admissions decisions, about 30, 35 minutes on everything else. So I was going to get away from the 5-parters, but that's when I was running the Monday, because it took 5 weeks. But if I'm doing Monday, Thursday, I can do the whole thing in 14 days. And it still allows me to do the deep dives and not go more than 20 minutes to keep you guys, interested. So I feel like this is the perfect solution. I have another really, really deep dive coming up on Verto education. If you don't know Verto's absolutely exploded. You hear about students starting in the spring, it's almost always Verto. So I did that this week. I'm pretty pumped and excited about that. So you get that on Thursday. All right, friends, what is this message that I said is important? Stay tuned to the end because I want you to hear it. So you guys know I've ended my podcasts pretty consistently by saying it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That's what will determine your career success. And a lot of times people will email me that and they'll say that they've adopted that as a mantra. We even put it on some brand new, thank you materials that I've ordered and I have sitting here in boxes. I got to get them out because that's kind of become one of our core things, that aphorisms, axioms that people know us for. Well, I'm going to share a second thing to me that is as important as that. Like if you ask me, what is your message for students? That's one of them. This other message I feel equally as strongly about. All right, so what is it? Well, I got to give you a little bit of background. So you guys know I'm into investing. And now let me say this right up front. This is really important. This is not financial advice. This is not financial advice. All right, friends, you may be wondering, why did you say over and over and over again, this is not financial advice when you're so bullish about the investment? So there's multiple reasons. First of all, no two people are the same. No two people have the same time horizon. No two people have the same philosophy of investing. One's more growth, one's more value, one's more blend, different views on international, different perspectives on things like crypto and, REITs and everything. And people have different risk tolerances. So what works for me may not work for you. So that's why I say over and over and over again, I'm just telling you what I do and what I believe in. I'm not giving you financial advice. Okay, hopefully you know that. But I'm going to just tell you, me personally, my single favorite investor in the country is Ankur Crawford. That's right, Ankur Crawford. The single biggest investment she has is the CNEQ fund, Concentrated Equity Fund. But I want to tell you about Ankur. First of all, she got a fascinating story. She's a South Asian woman who has won all kinds of awards, which I'll get to in a second. But she's in a complete male-dominated industry, asset management. I've been wanting to share this with you for about 6 months, but I think Bill Deresiewicz's message is powerful, but you can do financial services and have a very fulfilling life. And Ankur is an example of that. So I'll say more about that later. But I want to give you a little bit about Ankur's background because it's a fascinating background. She grew up all over the world. She lived in Florida. She lived in Kansas. She lived overseas. She was at a boarding school at a really, really young age, and she ended up in high school in Buffalo. And she went off to Cal Berkeley. She got a double degree. She got a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and she got another degree in material science. And then she went to Stanford, where she got both a master's and a PhD in material science. And she was very successful. She was working for Intel, and she won all kinds of awards, actually, while working for Intel. But let me share one of her awards with you. All this is going to make sense when you see where I'm going with this story. So she was awarded a fellowship from the prestigious Intel PhD fellowship program and she worked as an engineer with Intel, and she was also awarded a fellowship from the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine. She also holds several U.S. patents. Stuck, you're like, Stuck, where are you going with this? All right, here's where the story takes a twist. One day she realized, I'm very successful, but I'm not happy. So I watch everything I can watch or listen to everything I can listen to Encore because she's just that impressive to me. She's just phenomenal. So I was listening to an interview yesterday, and it's the Masters in Business series. It's up on YouTube that Barry Ritholtz does. And at the very end of the interview, Barry says to Encore, what advice do you have for recent college grads? Now, I've been wanting to share this with you for a while because I've heard Encore say this in other interviews, but it's kind of perfect because I wanted to say this at the end of the Bill Deresiewicz interview. But originally I was thinking, you know what? This advice is great for college grads. But as I listened, this advice is great for anybody. It's great for any parent who's listening. And to me, this is important as the other message that I say all the time. It's not where you go. So get ready to listen to this because I'm going to be playing this a lot. Here's what she said. And I literally played this. It was on YouTube. And I went back and I played it. I went because I want to make sure I captured every word verbatim. So here's what she says. For any college grad, make sure that you do something that you love. And it doesn't have to be that you love it every day, but you spend a lot of your time at work. More than a third of your life is going to be spent from here on at work. Make sure you do something that you believe in, that gives you gratification, that you feel like you are contributing to society. Don't just do it because you're on a treadmill. I am going to go do this because I set out to do this path and I just have to go trotting along. Allow yourself the grace to change and to change your mind. I did. And it was probably the best risk I ever took. The best gamble I ever took on was completely pivoting in my career. Allow yourself to explore because you change over time as well. What you want today may be different from what you want in 5 or 10 years. Definitely make sure you love what you do because once you know that you love what you do, you will be the best at it. Now, that's Ankur Crawford, Executive Vice President and Portfolio Manager at Alger. And I look at her investments more than anyone else. Now, you should know that in 2020, she's an honoree by Money Management for the top women in asset management. She's outperformed almost all the guys in her returns. And just so you know, only 11% of women are portfolio managers. And she's crushing the dudes. But that's her advice. And that's my advice to students and parents. And I can't think of any better advice. Some of you who are listening probably need to be doing something in college, to be honest. If you listen to every podcast and you watch every YouTube video, then you love this stuff. And you might want to think about pivoting. Think about that, friends. Adults, think about that. Think about, are you doing what you need to do or you need to make a pivot? See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about YCBK on social media. And you help us stay commercial free and pay our staff by donating at yourcollegeboundkid.com and clicking the donate button. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. If you have a question or suggestion, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button and speak, and we will do our best to get your question or your comment in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I'm the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admission and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, 2 admission officers from Colorado, Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Kate Strickland from CU Boulder, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, Heath Einstein, the Chief Enrollment Officer at TCU in Fort Worth, Carter DeLauro, a co-director of college counseling in New York, and Christina Lopez, the former Dean of Admission at Barnard College, and our international college specialist, Kevin Newton from Dallas, Texas. Our stupendous sound engineer who makes everything happen is Nemanja Matvic from Serbia. Our reliable webmaster is John Rooney. Website updates are done by Joy Stucker. Image editing by Vlad Honchar. And what would we do without our volunteers? Guy Pillsbury, Sony Patel, and Andy Bernstein are all helping us with podcast marketing. Carolyn Wood, Mark Doniger, and Carrie Roberts book interviews with thought leaders. Amanda Dugan, Colleen Sinoki, Nicole Resch, Trevor Smith, Ryan Stepler, and Lynn Labash send thank yous to interviewees. If you want a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcosgrownkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly newsletter, YCBK Plus, it's also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights and our upcoming events and receptions. And you can now do searches for past content by using our new Explore and Topics tabs. We really encourage you to explore our past content. We have close to 1,000 hours. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.